The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in September of 1882, and Evelyn Kane's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped it into the bathwater. She was heeding for the evening customers. She had written to the matrimonial agency 6 weeks ago, desperate and half convinced nothing would come of it. But here it was, thick cream paper with a masculine scrawl that spoke of ranch land and cattle, and a life far away from the smoke-filled saloon where she sang every night until her voice grew hoarse and her feet ached in those ridiculous heeled boots. The Red Garter Saloon in St. Louis was no place for dreams, but Evelyn had learned to survive there after her parents died in the cholera outbreak of 1878. She had a voice like honey and whiskey mixed together, or so the men said when they were drunk enough to wax poetic, and she could make a grown man cry with the right ballad. But singing in a saloon meant fending off hands that grabbed at her skirts, meant breathing in cigar smoke until her lungs burned, meant watching girls younger than her 22 years disappear upstairs with men who paid extra for more than music. Evelyn had sworn she would never go upstairs, and she had kept that promise, but she knew her luck would not hold forever. The saloon owner, Marcus Bentley, had been making comments lately about how she could earn more money, how the customers asked about her, how she was getting too old to be so particular. So she had written to the agency, pouring out her heart in careful script about wanting a different life, about being a hard worker, about knowing how to keep a house because her mother had taught her before the sickness took her. She had been honest about her work at the saloon, though she had emphasized the singing and downplayed the rest, hoping some man somewhere might overlook her questionable employment for the promise of companionship in the lonely territories out west. Owen McAllister's letter was surprisingly literate for a cattleman. He wrote about his ranch outside Tombstone, Arizona, about the 300 head of cattle he ran with the help of 2 hired hands, about the house he had built himself from adobe and timber. He wrote that he was 30 years old, never married, and tired of eating his own cooking. He wrote that he had no tolerance for dishonesty or laziness, but that he would treat a wife with respect and provide for her to the best of his ability. He wrote that he had seen her advertisement where she mentioned her singing, and he would like to hear her voice someday if she was willing. At the bottom of the letter, he had included money for a train ticket. Evelyn read it 3 times, standing in the back room of the saloon while the piano player banged out a rowdy tune in the front. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was real. This was her chance to leave St. Louis, to leave the Red Garter, to leave behind the groping hands and the leering faces, and the constant fear of what would happen when Marcus Bentley's patience finally ran out. She wrote back that same night, accepting his proposal. The train journey took 5 days, and Evelyn spent most of it staring out the window at the changing landscape, watching the green fields give way to brown plains, and then to the stark beauty of the desert. She had packed everything she owned into 2 carpet bags, which was not much. 4 dresses, 3 of them too fancy for ranch life, but all she had from her saloon days. Undergarments and a nightgown, her mother's cameo brooch, a book of poetry her father had given her on her 16th birthday, and the letters from Owen McAllister, which she read over and over until she had memorized every word. The other passengers gave her curious looks. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but Evelyn supposed her clothes marked her as something other than respectable. The green silk dress she wore had been altered from one of her stage costumes, the neckline raised and the trim removed, but it still clung to her figure in a way that made proper ladies sniff and turn away. She kept her eyes down and tried to make herself small in her seat, counting the miles until Tombstone. When the train finally pulled into the station, Evelyn's stomach was tied in knots. She had no idea what Owen McAllister looked like beyond the bare description in his letter. Tall, brown hair, usually wearing a dark hat. That could describe half the men in Arizona territory. She stepped off the train into the blazing afternoon sun and immediately understood why Owen had warned her to bring a bonnet. The heat was like nothing she had ever experienced, dry and fierce, making her dress stick to her back within seconds. The town of Tombstone spread out before her, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures that looked both rough and improbably civilized at once. She could see a large building with a sign proclaiming it the Crystal Palace Saloon, a general store, what looked like a newspaper office, and several other establishments lining the dusty main street. Miss Kane. Evelyn turned and found herself looking up at a man who matched the description, but was somehow more than she had imagined. Owen McAllister was indeed tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who worked hard every day of his life. His brown hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his face was weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rugged way that made her breath catch. His eyes were the color of coffee, warm and assessing as they met hers. "Yes," she managed. "Mr. McAllister, Owen, please." He removed his hat, revealing more of his sun-browned face. "Welcome to Tombstone. How was your journey? Long," Evelyn said honestly, "but not unpleasant." He nodded and reached for her bags. "I have a wagon waiting. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I thought we could stop by the courthouse first, if you are willing. I took the liberty of speaking to Judge Harper yesterday. He said he could perform the ceremony any time today." Evelyn's heart lurched. She had known this was coming, had agreed to it in her letters, but the reality of marrying a complete stranger within hours of meeting him suddenly felt overwhelming. Still, what choice did she have? She could not go back to St. Louis, could not return to the Red Garter and Marcus Bentley's increasingly insistent propositions. She had burned that bridge when she quit without notice and left town. "Yes," she said, lifting her chin. "I am willing." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, approval perhaps, or relief. "I appreciate your directness, Miss Kane. I think we will get along just fine." The courthouse was a modest building, and Judge Harper was a jovial man with a white beard who seemed delighted to perform a wedding on such short notice. Owen had brought along his 2 ranch hands as witnesses. A Mexican man named Carlos Rivera who had kind eyes and a ready smile, and a younger fellow named Jack Sutton who could not have been more than 19 and looked at Evelyn with poorly disguised curiosity. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Evelyn repeated the vows in a voice that only shook slightly, and Owen's hand was warm and calloused when he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. When Judge Harper pronounced them married and told Owen he could kiss his bride, Owen hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to her cheek. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. McAllister," he said quietly. Evelyn swallowed hard and nodded, not trusting her voice. The ride to the ranch gave her time to collect herself. Owen drove the wagon with easy competence, pointing out landmarks along the way. The road that led to the Clanton Ranch to the north, the creek that sometimes flooded in late summer when the monsoons came, the rocky outcropping where he had once spotted a mountain lion. He talked in a low, steady voice that was oddly soothing, and Evelyn found herself relaxing slightly despite her nerves. The ranch itself was larger than she had expected. The house was a solid adobe structure with a wooden porch and real glass windows, surrounded by a few outbuildings including a barn, a stable, and what looked like a bunkhouse for the hired hands. Cattle dotted the landscape in the distance, dark shapes against the gold and brown of the desert. Mountains rose up in the far background, purple in the late afternoon light. "It is not much," Owen said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "But it is paid for, and it is mine. Ours," he corrected himself. "It is beautiful," Evelyn said, and meant it. After years in the cramped, dark rooms above the Red Garter, the open space and clean air felt like heaven. Owen helped her down from the wagon and carried her bags inside. The interior of the house was Spartan but clean, with plastered walls and a stone fireplace. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined, with a sturdy table and chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and shelves lined with books and supplies. 2 doors led off the main room to what she assumed were bedrooms. "I will put your things in here," Owen said, heading for one of the doors. "This will be your room. Mine is across the way. I want you to know, Evelyn, that I will not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give. We are married in law, but I figure we should get to know each other first before we are married in practice, if you understand my meaning." Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks, but also a rush of profound relief. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is very considerate." Owen shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. "It is just decent. Now, I imagine you are hungry. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage beans and bacon and coffee that will not kill you. Tomorrow you can take over the kitchen if you like or not. I will not force you to do anything, Evelyn. I just want a partner, someone to share this life with. Can you accept that?" "Yes," Evelyn said, meeting his eyes. "I can accept that. And I want you to know, Owen, that I will work hard. I know how to keep house, and I can cook well enough once I learn what you like. And I can sing if you want. I know that is not much use on a ranch, but it is what I have to offer." Owen's expression softened. "I would like to hear you sing. Your advertisement mentioned it, and I confess I have been curious. We do not get much music out here, except what Jack can coax out of a harmonica." "I will sing for you," Evelyn promised. "Anytime you want." They fell into an awkward but not unpleasant routine over the next few days. Evelyn took over the cooking and cleaning, which was easier than she had expected because Owen was naturally tidy, and the house was small enough to manage without much difficulty. She learned that Owen rose before dawn and often did not return until dusk, spending his days riding the range, checking on cattle, mending fences, and performing the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. Carlos and Jack took their meals in the bunkhouse, giving Owen and Evelyn privacy, though Carlos's wife Maria came by on the 3rd day with a basket of vegetables from her garden and a warm smile that made Evelyn feel slightly less alone. Owen was true to his word about not pressuring her. He slept in his own room, rose early and quietly, and treated her with unfailing courtesy. But Evelyn could feel the tension between them, the awareness of their unusual situation. They were married but strangers, sharing a house but not a life, not yet. On the 5th evening, Owen came in from work looking more tired than usual. He washed up at the basin by the door, ate the stew Evelyn had prepared with quiet appreciation, and then sank into the rocking chair with a sigh. "Long day?" Evelyn asked, clearing the dishes. "Long week," Owen said. "We lost 3 head to something, maybe wolves, maybe rustlers. And I have been thinking about expanding the herd, which means I need to decide if I can afford more hands or if I am being too ambitious." Evelyn dried her hands and came to sit in the other chair, a straight-backed wooden one she had pulled over from the table. "Can I help you think it through?" Owen looked at her with surprise. "You want to hear about cattle and finances. I want to know about your life," Evelyn said. "Our life, I suppose, and maybe talking it through will help." So Owen talked, laying out his concerns and his hopes, and Evelyn listened. She did not know much about ranching, but she knew about money and budgets from her years of careful saving at the saloon. She asked questions that made Owen stop and reconsider his assumptions, and by the end of the conversation, he was smiling. "You have a good head for figures," he said. "Thank you, Evelyn. I think you may have just saved me from a costly mistake." "You are welcome," Evelyn said. Then on impulse she added, "Would you like me to sing for you? You said you wanted to hear." Owen's face lit up in a way that transformed him from merely handsome to something much more. "I would like that very much." Evelyn stood and smoothed her skirt, suddenly nervous. She had sung for hundreds of people in the saloon, but somehow this felt different, more intimate. She closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of the songs she knew, and then she began. She sang an old Irish ballad her mother had taught her, about a girl who waited for her love to return from the sea. Her voice filled the small house, rich and pure, rising and falling with the melody. When she finished, the silence felt heavy and full. Owen was staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. "That was beautiful," he said finally, his voice rough. "Evelyn, that was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. Would you sing for me every night?" Owen asked. "Not because I am demanding it, but because I would truly love to hear your voice after a long day. It feels like a gift." "Instead of what?" Evelyn asked, confused. Owen smiled. "Instead of silence, instead of loneliness. I have lived alone for a long time, Evelyn. I forgot what it was like to come home to someone, but you singing, that makes this place feel like a real home." Evelyn's heart swelled. "I will sing for you every night," she said. "I promise." And she did. Every evening after dinner, once the dishes were done and Owen was settled in his chair, Evelyn would sing. Sometimes she sang the old ballads, sometimes hymns she remembered from childhood, sometimes the livelier songs she had performed at the saloon, though she carefully avoided the bawdy ones. Owen would sit and listen with his eyes closed, his face relaxed in a way it never was during the day, and Evelyn began to understand that her singing was not just entertainment but comfort, a balm for the hardship of his days. As the weeks passed, they grew more comfortable with each other. Owen began to seek out her company, coming in earlier when he could, sitting with her at the table while she worked on mending or baking. He taught her to ride, putting her on his gentlest mare and leading her around the yard until she got the feel of it. Evelyn discovered she loved riding, loved the freedom of it, and soon she was accompanying Owen on some of his shorter trips around the ranch. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Owen told her about growing up in Texas, about leaving home at 17 to make his own way, about the years of hard work that had finally earned him this ranch. Evelyn told him about her parents, about the cholera outbreak, about the desperation that had driven her to the Red Garter. She did not tell him everything about the saloon, but she told him enough that he would understand where she had come from. Owen listened without judgment. "You survived," he said simply. "That takes strength. I admire that, Evelyn." It was in the middle of October, nearly 6 weeks after her arrival, that everything changed. Owen had ridden out early to check on some cattle in the north pasture, and he returned just after noon in a state Evelyn had never seen him in. His face was flushed with anger, and he was gripping the reins so tightly his knuckles were white. "What happened?" Evelyn asked, hurrying out to meet him. "Rustlers," Owen said, swinging down from his horse. "They took at least 20 head last night, maybe more. I found tracks leading north toward the territorial line. If I ride hard, I might be able to catch them before they cross over." "Should you not get the sheriff?" Evelyn asked, alarmed. "By the time I ride to Tombstone and bring back the sheriff, they will be long gone," Owen said. He was already checking his rifle, his movements sharp and angry. I am going after them now. Carlos and Jack are rounding up what is left of the herd and bringing them closer to the house. Evelyn grabbed his arm. Owen, please, is it worth risking your life for cattle? Owen stopped and looked at her, and something in his expression softened. Those cattle are our future, Evelyn. They represent years of work. If I let rustlers take them without a fight, I might as well give up ranching altogether. Then let me come with you, Evelyn said. Absolutely not, Owen said firmly. It is too dangerous. I can shoot, Evelyn lied, desperate to keep him from riding off into danger alone. I can help. Owen gave her a long look. Have you ever fired a gun, Evelyn? She hesitated, and he shook his head. Stay here. If I am not back by tomorrow night, ride into town and get the sheriff. Can you do that for me? Owen, he took her face in his hands, the first time he had touched her so intimately since their wedding day. I will be careful, I promise, but I need to do this. Then he kissed her, a real kiss this time, firm and warm and over too quickly. He mounted his horse and rode out before Evelyn could find words to call him back. She spent the rest of that day and all of the next in a state of barely controlled panic. Maria came by and tried to comfort her, but Evelyn could not shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen. She threw herself into chores, scrubbing the house from top to bottom, baking enough bread to feed the entire ranch for a week, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from imagining Owen shot or bleeding or worse. Carlos came by in the evening to check on her. Mr. Owen is a smart man, he said gently. He will not take foolish risks. But Evelyn knew that going after rustlers at all was a foolish risk, and she could not be comforted. Owen returned just before midnight on the second night. Evelyn heard the horse and ran outside, her heart in her throat. He was alive, that was the first thing, but he was also hurt. Blood stained his shirt on the left side, and he was holding himself carefully as he dismounted. I am all right, he said before she could speak. It is just a graze. But Evelyn, I need your help. She helped him inside and into a chair, then fetched water and clean cloth with shaking hands. When she peeled back his shirt, she found a bullet wound along his ribs, shallow but ugly and still bleeding sluggishly. It looks worse than it is, Owen said, wincing as she cleaned it. I have had worse. That is not comforting, Evelyn said, her voice tight. What happened? I caught up with them about 20 miles north. There were 4 of them, and they were not inclined to give up the cattle peacefully. We exchanged shots. I hit 2 of them, and the other 2 decided it was not worth it and ran. I got our cattle back. Nearly got yourself killed, Evelyn said, her hands trembling as she bandaged the wound. Owen caught her hands, stilling them. But I did not. I am here. I am safe. Evelyn looked up at him, and suddenly all the fear and worry of the past 2 days broke over her like a wave. I thought I lost you, she whispered. I thought you were dead, and I realized that I could not bear it. Owen, I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but I have come to care for you so much. The thought of you not coming back, Owen pulled her into his lap, ignoring the twinge in his side, and kissed her properly this time, deep and thorough and full of promise. I care for you too, he said against her lips. More than I thought possible in such a short time. Evelyn, you have brought light into my life. Coming home to you, hearing you sing every night, it has made me happier than I have been in years. Then do not risk yourself like that again, Evelyn said, clinging to him. Nothing is worth losing you. I will be more careful, Owen promised. But I cannot promise I will never be in danger. This is a hard life out here, Evelyn. There are dangers I cannot always avoid. Then I will learn to shoot, Evelyn said fiercely. I will learn to ride better. I will learn whatever I need to learn so that I can help you, so that you are not facing these dangers alone. Owen smiled and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You are remarkable, do you know that? "Teach me," Evelyn insisted. So he did. Once his wound had healed enough, Owen began teaching Evelyn to shoot. She turned out to have a good eye and a steady hand, and within a few weeks she could hit a target more often than not. He also taught her more about the ranch, about reading the land and the weather, about understanding cattle and horses. Evelyn soaked up the knowledge like a sponge, determined to be a true partner to him. Their relationship deepened during those autumn weeks. They were still sleeping in separate rooms, but the physical distance was no longer matched by emotional distance. They talked late into the night, shared their hopes and dreams, made plans for the future. Owen wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy more land to the east. Evelyn wanted to start a garden in the spring, maybe get some chickens. They both wanted children eventually, though neither of them said it out loud yet, and every night, Evelyn sang for Owen. It became the part of the day they both looked forward to most. That quiet time after dinner when Evelyn's voice would fill the house with music, and Owen would listen with his eyes closed and a small smile on his face. In late November, Owen had to make a trip to Tucson to sell some cattle and buy supplies for the winter. He asked Evelyn if she wanted to come with him, and she agreed eagerly. She had not been off the ranch except for a few trips to Tombstone for church and shopping, and the prospect of seeing a real city was exciting. They made the journey over 3 days, camping at night under the stars. Owen was attentive and protective, always making sure Evelyn was comfortable, teaching her how to make coffee over an open fire and how to identify the tracks of different animals. At night, wrapped in blankets and lying close to the fire, they talked about everything and nothing. On the second night, with the fire burning low and the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, Owen reached out and took Evelyn's hand. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, "about us, about this marriage." Evelyn's heart began to pound. "Yes. When we got married, I told you I would not expect anything from you that you were not ready to give. I meant that, and I still mean it. But Evelyn, I want you to know that I have fallen in love with you, completely and utterly. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep. I want this to be a real marriage in every sense, but only if that is what you want too." Evelyn turned to look at him, his face half shadowed in the firelight. "I love you too," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I think I started falling for you the first time you asked me to sing, and I have been falling ever since. Yes, Owen, I want this to be a real marriage. I want to be your wife in every way." Owen kissed her then, slowly and thoroughly, and when he pulled back his eyes were dark with emotion. "When we get to Tucson," he said, "I am going to buy you a proper wedding ring. That thin gold band I gave you was all I could afford at the time, but you deserve something better." "I do not need anything better," Evelyn protested. "I love the ring you gave me." "Nevertheless," Owen said, smiling, "let me do this for you." Tucson was bigger than Tombstone, bustling with activity despite the cooling weather. Owen conducted his business with the cattle broker and then took Evelyn shopping. He bought her a new dress, a practical calico for everyday wear, and then he took her to a jeweler and bought her a ring with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It matches your eyes," he said, slipping it onto her finger next to the gold band. "And it is a fraction of what you deserve, but it is the best I can do right now." Evelyn looked at the ring through tears. "It is perfect. You are perfect." They stayed in Tucson for 2 nights, in a hotel with a real bed and walls that did not let in the wind. And on the second night, they consummated their marriage, coming together with tenderness and passion that surprised them both. Owen was gentle and patient, mindful of her inexperience, and Evelyn discovered that the physical act of love could be beautiful when it was with someone who truly cared for you. Afterwards, lying in Owen's arms with her head on his chest, Evelyn sang softly, a love song she had not dared to sing before because it felt too personal. Owen held her close and stroked her hair, and Evelyn thought that she had never been happier in her entire life. They returned to the ranch just before December, and the change in their relationship was immediately obvious. Owen moved his things into Evelyn's room, and they became truly husband and wife. The winter months were quiet on the ranch, giving them time to settle into their new dynamic. They worked together during the day and came together at night, and the singing continued, a ritual that bound them as much as their physical intimacy. Christmas came, and Evelyn made a feast with Maria's help. Carlos and Jack and Maria and her 2 children joined them, and the house was full of laughter and music. Owen gave Evelyn a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog, soft wool in deep blue, and Evelyn gave Owen a new hat she had bought in Tucson and hidden away. They sang carols together, Evelyn leading and the others joining in as best they could, and Owen looked at his wife with such love that Maria whispered to Evelyn later that she had never seen a man so smitten. The new year of 1883 brought changes. In February, Evelyn realized her monthly courses had not come, and she was experiencing morning sickness. She was pregnant. When she told Owen, he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests, his face alight with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying. "Evelyn, we are going to have a baby." "I know," Evelyn said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I was there when it happened." Owen became even more protective, insisting that Evelyn not overwork herself, hovering over her until she had to shoo him away. But she loved his attention, loved seeing how excited he was about becoming a father. They spent the long spring evenings planning for the baby, deciding which room would become the nursery, talking about names. In May, tragedy struck the ranch. Jack Sutton was thrown from a horse and broke his leg badly. Owen and Carlos got him to the doctor in Tombstone, but the doctor said Jack would not be able to work as a ranch hand anymore once the leg healed. The break was too severe, and Jack would likely walk with a limp for the rest of his life. Owen was devastated, blaming himself for not checking the horse more carefully. Jack was only 20 years old, and his career as a cowboy was essentially over. Owen paid for all of Jack's medical bills and gave him 3 months' wages besides, but it did not ease his guilt. "These things happen," Evelyn told him, holding him as he wrestled with his feelings. "It was an accident, Owen. You could not have prevented it." "I should have been more careful," Owen said. "I should have checked that saddle, checked that horse." "You did everything right," Evelyn insisted. "Sometimes bad things just happen, and we have to accept that and move forward. Jack will be all right. He is young and strong. He will find another way to make a living." Owen knew she was right, but it still weighed on him. He helped Jack find a position as a clerk in one of the stores in Tombstone, work that would not require him to be on his feet all day or do heavy labor. Jack was grateful, though Evelyn could see the sadness in his eyes at having to give up the cowboy life he loved. With Jack gone, Owen hired a new hand, an older man named Tom Briggs who had decades of experience and a calm, steady way about him that reminded Evelyn of her father. Tom fit in well with Carlos, and the ranch continued to run smoothly despite the earlier setback. As summer came and Evelyn's pregnancy advanced, she had to stop riding and cut back on some of her heavier chores. She spent more time in the house, sewing baby clothes and preparing the nursery. Maria became a close friend, teaching her about childbirth and babies, sharing her own experiences. Evelyn was nervous about the birth, but also excited. She and Owen had decided not to find out if it was a boy or girl ahead of time, though Owen confessed he hoped for a son who could eventually take over the ranch. In September, almost exactly a year after Evelyn had arrived in Tombstone, she went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Maria stayed with her the whole time, coaching her through the contractions, while Owen paced outside the bedroom and nearly wore a hole in the floor. The doctor had come from town, a gruff older man named Dr. Phillips, who nonetheless was competent and reassuring. When the baby finally came, it was a boy. A healthy, screaming, red-faced boy with a shocking amount of dark hair. Dr. Phillips cleaned the baby and handed him to Evelyn, who was exhausted but glowing. "You have a son, Mrs. McAllister." Owen was allowed in then, and he approached the bed with tears streaming down his face. "Evelyn," he whispered. "Oh, Evelyn, meet your son," Evelyn said, holding up the baby. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never quite decided. Owen looked at his son, at this tiny perfect human they had created together, and said, "Samuel, after my father. Samuel Owen McAllister." "Samuel," Evelyn repeated, trying it out. "Yes, I like that." Owen carefully took the baby, cradling him with surprising ease for someone who claimed to know nothing about infants. "Hello, Samuel," he said softly. "Welcome to the world, son." The next few months were chaotic as they adjusted to life with a baby. Samuel was a good baby for the most part, but he still needed to be fed every few hours and changed and held and soothed. Evelyn was exhausted but happy, and Owen proved to be a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he could despite his ranch duties. Evelyn still sang every night, but now she sang lullabies to Samuel as well as the songs Owen loved. The baby would quiet at the sound of her voice, his dark eyes fixed on her face, and Owen would watch them both with an expression of such profound contentment that it made Evelyn's heart ache with love. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, life had settled into a new routine. The ranch was doing well. Owen had managed to expand the herd slightly and was talking about buying that land to the east he had mentioned. Evelyn had her garden now, vegetables growing in neat rows behind the house, and chickens scratching in a coop Tom had built. She had learned to be a rancher's wife, to handle the isolation and the hard work, and she had found that she loved this life in a way she never could have imagined when she was singing in the Red Garter. One evening in March of 1884, after Samuel had been put to bed and the house was quiet, Owen pulled Evelyn onto his lap in the rocking chair. "I have been thinking," he said. "That is usually dangerous," Evelyn teased. Owen smiled. "I have been thinking about how lucky I am. A year and a half ago I was alone in this house, eating terrible food and going to bed in silence every night. Now I have a beautiful wife, a healthy son, and a home full of love and music. You gave me all of that, Evelyn." Evelyn kissed him softly. "We gave it to each other." "You took a chance on a saloon singer with a questionable past, Owen. You gave me a new life, a home, a family. I will never stop being grateful for that." "Will you sing for me?" Owen asked. "That song you sang on our wedding trip, the love song." Evelyn stood and began to sing, her voice as pure and beautiful as ever, the words speaking of eternal love and devotion. Owen listened with his eyes closed, and when she finished, he opened them and said, "Every night, Evelyn, I want you to sing for me every night for the rest of our lives." "Instead of silence," Evelyn asked, remembering his words from so long ago. "Instead of loneliness," Owen corrected. "Instead of emptiness. Your voice fills this house and my heart, and I never want to be without it." "Then you never will be," Evelyn promised. "I will sing for you every night, Owen, for as long as we both shall live." And she did. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were droughts that tested the ranch and winters harsh enough to lose cattle despite their best efforts. There were difficult moments when money was tight and Evelyn had to stretch every dollar. There were illnesses and injuries, close calls that reminded them both of how fragile life could be, but there were also triumphs. Owen bought that land to the east in 1885, doubling the size of the ranch. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved horses and following his father around the ranch. In 1886, Evelyn gave birth to a daughter, Emma Rose, who had her mother's blue eyes and her father's stubborn chin. 2 years later, another son arrived, James Thomas, completing their family. Carlos and Maria remained close friends, their children growing up alongside the McAllister children. Tom Briggs worked for the ranch until he retired in 1890, and Owen hired 2 younger men to take his place. The ranch continued to prosper under Owen's careful management and Evelyn's practical oversight of the household finances. Jack Sutton married the daughter of the store owner he worked for and started a family of his own in Tombstone. He and Owen remained friends, and Jack often told people that Owen McAllister was the finest man he had ever known, standing by him when he had been injured and could not work. Through it all, Evelyn sang every night. Sometimes it was for Owen alone, after the children were in bed. Sometimes it was for the whole family, teaching her children the old songs her mother had taught her. Sometimes it was for visitors who came to dinner and stayed late, filling the house with music and laughter. Her voice became something of a legend in the area. People would talk about the singing rancher's wife, about how her voice could bring tears to your eyes or make you smile depending on the song. Occasionally, someone would suggest she should sing in town, maybe at the church or at one of the social gatherings, but Evelyn always refused. She sang for her family, for Owen, and that was enough. Owen never forgot the gift she had given him. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1892, he took her back to Tucson, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with Maria. He had saved up and bought her a beautiful pendant, a sapphire on a gold chain to match her ring. 10 years, he said, fastening it around her neck. 10 years of coming home to your voice, to your love. You have made my life richer than I ever dreamed possible, Evelyn. Evelyn turned and wrapped her arms around his neck. You saved me, Owen. You gave me a life worth living, a family to love, a home where I belong. I was so lost when I came to Arizona, so desperate and afraid. But you made me feel safe. You made me feel valued for something more than just my voice. Your voice is remarkable, Owen said, but it is only a small part of why I love you. You are strong and smart and brave. You are a wonderful mother and an incredible partner. I fall more in love with you every day. They spent 3 days in Tucson, just the 2 of them, remembering the early days of their marriage and celebrating how far they had come. On the last night, lying in bed in their hotel room, Evelyn sang softly, a new song she had been working on, a song about love that endures through hardship and grows stronger with time. When she finished, Owen pulled her close and said, "That was beautiful. Is it new?" "I wrote it," Evelyn admitted, "about us, about this life we have built together." Owen was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was thick with emotion. "Sing it again, and then keep singing it every night so I never forget how lucky I am." "You are going to hear that song so many times you will get sick of it," Evelyn warned, laughing. "Never," Owen said firmly. "I will never get tired of hearing you sing, Evelyn, not if I live to be 100. As the years passed into the 1890s, and then into the new century, the McAllister Ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. Owen's hard work and smart decisions paid off, and by the time Arizona became a state in 1912, the ranch was known throughout the region. Samuel grew up to be a fine rancher himself, eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations as Owen got older. Emma married a schoolteacher from Tucson and moved away, but she visited often with her own children. James became a lawyer and set up practice in Tombstone, much to his parents' pride. Evelyn aged gracefully, her hair turning silver but her voice remaining strong and true. She sang for her grandchildren the same songs she had sung for her own children, passing down the music through the generations. Owen's hair also went white, and his face became lined with age, but his love for his wife never diminished. He still asked her to sing every night, and she still did, her voice filling their home with beauty and memory. In 1918, they celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a big celebration, and that evening, after everyone had gone to bed or headed home, Owen and Evelyn sat together on the porch in the warm summer night. "Sing for me," Owen said, as he had said countless times over the years. Evelyn smiled and began to sing, her voice perhaps not quite as powerful as it had been in her youth, but still beautiful, still full of emotion. She sang the love song she had written so many years ago in Tucson, the song about enduring love. When she finished, Owen took her hand, the one that still wore the gold band and the sapphire ring he had given her so long ago. "Every night," he said softly. "You have sung for me every night for 36 years. Do you know what a gift that has been?" "It has been my joy," Evelyn said honestly. "Singing for you has never been a chore, Owen. It has been my way of telling you every day how much I love you." "Instead of silence," Owen said, echoing the words from their early days. "Instead of loneliness," Evelyn finished. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Owen agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible. You took a lonely cowboy and gave him a family, a home full of love and laughter and music. I could not have asked for anything more." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out over the desert. The ranch spread out around them, the result of decades of hard work and dedication. Their children were grown and successful. Their grandchildren were healthy and happy. They had built something lasting, something real. "Owen," Evelyn said softly, "do you remember what you said to me that first week, when you asked me to sing for you?" "I remember everything about those early days," Owen said. "What specifically are you thinking of? You said that my singing made the house feel like a real home. That it was a gift, hearing my voice after a long day." "I meant it then, and I mean it now," Owen said. "Your voice has been the soundtrack of my life, Evelyn. Every major moment, every difficult day, every celebration, you have been there singing. I cannot imagine my life without it." "Then you will never have to," Evelyn said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Because I will keep singing for you every night for as long as I have breath in my body." And she did, faithfully, lovingly, until the end of their days. Owen lived to be 78 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1930. Evelyn, ever practical, had already planned his funeral, and at the service, instead of allowing anyone else to sing, she stood by his casket and sang all of his favorite songs, her voice cracking with grief but still beautiful. Their children and grandchildren wept, knowing they were witnessing something profound, a final act of love from a woman who had spent nearly 50 years singing for the man she adored. Evelyn lived another 3 years without Owen, and they were the hardest years of her life. But she stayed on the ranch, helping Samuel run things, spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had started to arrive. And every night, alone in the house she had shared with Owen for so many years, she sang. She sang the songs he had loved, sang to the empty rocking chair where he used to sit, sang because it kept him alive in her heart. When Evelyn finally passed in 1933 at the age of 73, her family gathered to mourn. At her funeral, Emma stood up and told the story of how her mother had been a mail-order bride, how she had come to Arizona from St. Louis with nothing but 2 carpetbags and a beautiful voice. She told how Owen had asked Evelyn to sing for him every night, and how Evelyn had kept that promise for nearly 50 years. "My mother taught us that love is shown in the everyday moments," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "In the small acts of kindness, in the promises kept." She sang for my father every night because it brought him joy, because it was her way of saying "I love you" without words, and he treasured that gift until the day he died. Samuel stood up then and added, "My father used to tell me that marrying my mother was the best decision he ever made. He said she had saved him from a life of loneliness, that her voice had filled the empty spaces in his heart. They built this ranch together, raised us together, and loved each other with a devotion I have tried to emulate in my own marriage. They were proof that love, real love, endures." James finished by saying, "My parents' story started with a letter and a leap of faith. 2 strangers who became partners, friends, and lovers. They taught us that family is built on trust and respect and the daily choice to show up for each other. My mother sang for my father every night, and in doing so, she created a home filled with music and love. That is the legacy they leave us." They buried Evelyn next to Owen on a hill overlooking the ranch, where the desert stretched out in all directions and the sky was impossibly big. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, Samuel had added a simple inscription. She sang for him every night. The McAllister ranch remained in the family for generations, passed down from Samuel to his children and then to his grandchildren. And while the world changed around it, while Arizona grew from a wild territory into a modern state, while technology advanced and old ways faded, the story of Owen and Evelyn remained. It became family legend, told to each new generation, about the mail-order bride who had been a saloon singer and the cowboy who had asked her to sing for him every night instead of living in silence. In the main house, which was eventually renovated and expanded but never torn down, there was a photograph that hung in the living room. It showed Owen and Evelyn on their 25th anniversary, standing in front of the house with their arms around each other. Owen was looking at the camera with a slight smile, but Evelyn was looking at Owen, her face full of such love and tenderness that it made people stop and stare. Beneath the photograph was a small plaque with a quote from Owen, taken from a letter he had written to his son Samuel. "Your mother's voice brought music to my life, but her love brought meaning. I am the luckiest man who ever lived." The descendants of Owen and Evelyn McAllister would sometimes gather at the ranch for reunions. And on those evenings, after dinner was finished and the desert night had fallen, someone would inevitably ask if anyone knew the old songs that Evelyn used to sing. And whoever remembered would stand up and sing, their voice carrying across the desert just as Evelyn's had done so many years before, keeping alive the tradition of music and love that had started with a desperate letter, a lonely cowboy, and a woman brave enough to cross a continent for a chance at a better life. The story of their love became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of keeping promises, of showing up day after day, of finding extraordinary beauty in ordinary moments. Evelyn had sung for Owen every night for nearly 50 years, and in doing so, she had created something that transcended the simple act of making music. She had created a bond that death itself could not break, a legacy that lived on in the hearts of everyone who heard their story. And on quiet nights at the ranch, when the wind blew across the desert and the stars filled the sky, some swore they could still hear it. The faint, beautiful sound of a woman singing, her voice full of love and longing, carrying across the years like a promise kept, like a prayer answered, like a dream that had come true against all odds in the wild and unforgiving beauty of the Arizona desert. The old adobe house still stood, weathered but solid, a testament to Owen's craftsmanship and determination. The cattle still grazed on the land he had worked so hard to acquire and maintain. The mountains still rose up in the distance, purple and eternal. And somewhere in the fabric of that place, woven into the very soil and stone, was the echo of a love that had begun with uncertainty and grown into something legendary. Owen had asked Evelyn to sing for him every night instead of leaving him to silence and loneliness, and she had agreed, never imagining how that simple promise would shape the rest of her life. But in keeping that promise, in raising her voice day after day, year after year, decade after decade, Evelyn had done more than just please her husband. She had created a home in the truest sense, a place where love was expressed not just in words but in action, where beauty existed alongside hardship, where two people who had started as strangers had become so intertwined that they could not be separated even by death. Their story ended, as all stories must, with their passing. But the impact of their love continued, rippling out through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through the ranch that bore their name, through the community they had helped build. And whenever someone asked about the history of the McAllister Ranch, about how it had come to be and who had founded it, the answer always included the story of Evelyn and Owen, the mail-order bride and the cowboy, and the promise that had bound them together. She had sung for him every night, and he had loved her with everything he had, and together they had built a life that proved that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of courage. Evelyn had been brave enough to answer that advertisement, brave enough to leave everything she knew for a chance at something better. Owen had been brave enough to trust a stranger, brave enough to open his heart to the possibility of love. And their bravery had been rewarded with 48 years of partnership, of devotion, of a love so deep and true that it became the foundation on which generations were built. In the end, that was their legacy. Not just the ranch or the children or the financial success, but the proof that love, when tended carefully and expressed faithfully, could transform lives. Evelyn's voice had been beautiful, yes, but it was the love behind the singing that had made it transcendent. And Owen's appreciation had been genuine, but it was the life he built around that appreciation that had made it meaningful. They had found each other against impossible odds, two lonely people in a harsh land, and they had created something gentle and beautiful and lasting. The Wild West had been their stage, the Arizona desert their backdrop, but their story was universal. Two people choosing each other, day after day, night after night, promise kept and love affirmed through the simple act of singing. And so the legend lived on, passed down through the generations, a story of faith and commitment and the transformative power of keeping your word. Evelyn had promised to sing for Owen every night, and she had, and that promise had become the thread that wove their lives together into something remarkable. The desert remembered them, the land remembered them, and most importantly, their family remembered them. And on those rare, perfect evenings when the temperature was just right, and the sky was clear, and the world seemed to hold its breath, the current occupants of the McAllister Ranch would sometimes step outside and listen to the wind, imagining they could hear the echoes of that long-ago promise being kept over and over, an eternal song of love that had begun in 1882 and had never truly ended.